From Washington, D.C. to the Central Coast, this is Focus with Farr, where our representative in Washington hosts in-depth discussions of important issues of the day. And now, Congressman Sam Farr.
Hello, I'm Sam Farr, and I want to welcome you to another program of Focus with Farr. We have a very interesting guest today. In fact, got to be one of my favorite guests because he's the director of the Peace Corps. And many of you know I served in the Peace Corps in the early 60s in Colombia, South America. And I've been a big fan of the Peace Corps, and I think it's one of the most effective international aid programs. And it essentially turns every American who serves overseas into an ambassador about that country. So, Aaron Williams, thank you for coming. Really delightful. We have the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps this year. You're becoming a national hero. You served in the Peace Corps yourself in the early years in Dominican Republic. In fact, you met your wife in Dominican Republic. Right. You've had a career in the U.S. and worked for Peace Corps, and then had a career in the State Department. I mean, the USAID, where you ended up with an incredible, distinguished career with an extensive experience in design and management assistance in Latin America and Africa, Asia and the Middle East. And you got the Distinguished Career Award from USAID, and I understand twice received the Presidential Award for Distinguished Service. With a background like that and coming to the Peace Corps, how did it all start? Was Peace Corps what got you into the Peace Corps, and what made you want to become director of the Peace Corps?
Well, first of all, Congressman Farr, it's always good to be with you. It's always good to be with a fellow returned Peace Corps volunteer and someone who really cares about the Peace Corps and wants to support our mission of promoting world peace and friendship now that we are approaching our 50th anniversary. Well, to answer your question, the Peace Corps means everything to me because it changed my life forever. It was a transformative experience working with teachers in the rural areas of the Dominican Republic. Gave me experience and insights, a chance to learn about another culture, to learn another language, things I never imagined growing up on the south side of Chicago. That I have an opportunity to actually experience this. So by joining—
What was the motivation to get into the Peace Corps growing up in the south side of Chicago? I mean, I grew up in California, and I had parents that did a lot of public service and were very active, and I did it, and it just went— my first cross-cultural experience in high school just drew me to— I knew I wanted to learn another language and live in another culture. What was it?
In my case, I had never left Chicago. I'd never flown on an airplane until I actually went to the Dominican Republic with the Peace Corps. So I heard, when I was a young boy, I heard President Kennedy talk about this opportunity to serve overseas. Then I heard Sergeant Shriver give a graduation speech, I believe, in Notre Dame. And I said to myself, my God, can I really do that? Can you go overseas, learn another language, work with people of different cultures? And I said, when I graduate from college, I'm going to try to do that. So I was inspired by Kennedy and Shriver themselves.
And you went in the early 60s too.
In
I mean,
67,
mid-60s.
yeah.
I think you were just after I got home, you went in.
That's right, 67 to 70, I served in the Dominican
Republic. We were the beginning, we were the frontier, the first responders, right?
That's right, we were the pioneers.
Pioneers.
You were a pioneer.
Yeah,
I came in after you.
Well, now you're director. What a great job. I think it's the greatest job in government. 50th anniversary, a lot of respect for the initiation. We're doing reenactments and remembrances, and do a whole year here in Washington on the creation of the Peace Corps. Also, you and I were at Sergeant Shriver's funeral. What a moving moment. I don't think I've ever been to a more incredibly beautiful and meaningful service than his. And it was just look around the room, and whether you were a celebrity like Chris Matthews, or but have the president there, former president, and everybody. It was just remarkable. It is such a I mean, it seems like it's the best of all the government programs, all of things one can do in government. Peace Corps still stands out as like the golden opportunity.
I think that's right. I mean, I think in the words of Sergeant Shriver, the Peace Corps personifies the best of America, without a doubt. We've been doing that for 50 years. And as you said, we were together at Sergeant Shriver's memorial service. What a testimonial to a legendary leader, somebody who had the foresight, the vision to create this new way for Americans to cross the bridge, to learn about other cultures, other languages, to make a difference in the world, and we continue to do that. Now, as you know, we've got 200,000 Americans have served in the Peace Corps over the past 50 years, served in 140 countries. You were in Colombia, I was in the Dominican Republic, and it's a tremendous group of people, and they're all leaders in many walks of life in our country, in health education, higher education, in schools. It's really in politics. Here we have 4 returned Peace Corps volunteers in the Congress, including yourself. So it's a tremendous tradition, and I think that what we need to do is to continue to offer this opportunity to Americans to serve. I mean, it's important to continue to have a strong Peace Corps, a vibrant Peace Corps that provides people with the opportunity, because now, it seems to me, Congressman, in the 21st century, now more than ever before, we need to have an opportunity to learn about the outside world, to actually sit down and work shoulder to shoulder with people in different countries, speaking their language and working on their priorities. It makes all the difference in the world.
I remember Sergeant Shriver telling me when he was back at the Peace Corps headquarters and doing one of these, as you've done with your staff, of bringing back people and talking about their experience, and he was talking about being the first director. And he mentioned something so profound, I never read it anywhere, that he and Kennedy had a discussion about how big the Peace Corps could get, and Kennedy imagined it to being 100,000 volunteers. And look at the countries they first went to. They went to Afghanistan, they went to Iran. If indeed we had flooded those countries with young idealistic Americans in the 60s, one wonders what difference that would have made, whether we would have to be flooding those countries with troops today, had we been able to sort of help these failed states really achieve a symbol of democracy. I mean, the country that I serve in is one of the cradles of democracy in Latin America, even though it's been through all this violence in Colombia. To walk in the footsteps of Sergeant Shriver, what's it like now?
It is an honor and privilege to walk in the footsteps of such a legendary leader, a great humanitarian who made such a difference in the lives of millions of people around the world, and of course in the lives of Americans here. I think that when I think about Sergeant Shriver, I think about the fact that in the 1960s, this was a post-colonial era. Many of the countries in Asia and Africa had just pushed out the colonial masters, the Dutch, the French, the British, and here comes Sergeant Shriver with this incredible idea that nobody knew what the Peace Corps really was. And he convinced the leaders, many of them who had suffered prison terms during the colonial era, he convinced these individuals, people like Nehru and Nkrumah in Ghana, to take young Americans to help them build their nations. That was an extraordinary bit of leadership that I think the world has never seen before.
And that's right. We have to remind people that we don't go into these countries without first being invited by the countries. And
it gives us a great baseline. We only go where we're invited. And we work on the development priorities, the projects that the countries deem to be most important, whether it's in combating HIV/AIDS or fighting malaria in Africa, teaching English as a second language around the world, stretching from Cambodia to Costa Rica to Mali, working on environmental degradation by planting trees. It's amazing what Peace Corps volunteers do. The range of things that they do today is really quite extraordinary.
I have people stopping me all the time and saying, I'm thinking about going to the Peace Corps. I wish I'd gone to the Peace Corps, or maybe I'm too old. I tell them, look, you're never too old. There's no age limit. In fact, an elderly couple just went from my community in the Peace Corps and just having the time of their life. I tell people, I don't know whether this is the thing to tell them. I said, go to the Peace Corps website, look up and see what countries the Peace Corps is in, and in each one of those countries, a list of programs, and sort of tailor-make, look at where in the world you want to go, what skills do you have? I mean, we want to take, and the host country doesn't want us to send people over there that don't have the skills to do the teaching or do the community development and working in those programs. Is there another message that you try to give to people?
I think, first of all, Congressman, that's a great message, and also let me comment on age. Our oldest volunteer is 86 years old. She's a healthcare worker in rural Morocco. What an extraordinary individual. And so we have many people come in after retirement or mid-career to the Peace Corps, so it's open to all ages. Of course, we'll continue to have the vast majority of our volunteers will continue to be recent college graduates, journalists who can be trained and work in important programs. So I think the message is that if you want to serve, if you want to have an opportunity to engage in a global experience that will give you leadership skills early on in life, the Peace Corps is still the very best opportunity to do that, without a doubt.
couple of political comments. One is a story about the members of Congress who've been in the Peace Corps.
Right.
Several years ago, we met with all the Capitol staffers who were interested in hearing about the Peace Corps, and we were all invited in, Republicans and Democrats. One thing, we had all been in the Peace Corps, all in different countries, all at different times. And all of us stated, and we'd never done this to ourselves, that of the experience of being elected to Congress and having served in the Peace Corps, the Peace Corps experience was even more exciting, more beneficial, more meaningful than having been members of Congress. I jokingly said, well, we all got elected, so we can say that. But it was really significant that of the big things that had happened to them in lives, Peace Corps was still the best of all of them. And I hear that all the time. The other thing the political thing that I'm so involved in, and thank you for your support, is that I really believe that we have to fulfill that dream of doubling the size of the Peace Corps. I mean, we ought to be at 15, 16, 17,000 Peace Corps volunteers. We're at 8,000 now. What's the
8,600. 8,600.
And if you think about it, we have 20 countries that want us. They're
At least.
trying to, and we can't get there without more money. So you have the supply side of all these Americans, up to 20,000 Americans.
We have 14,000 Americans applying for 4,000 positions.
Yeah,
in the
there
Peace
it
Corps.
is.
That's right,
14,000 applications for 4,000
4,000
positions.
That's right.
We could accept almost every one of those applications if Congress would appropriate enough money to put these Peace Corps volunteers in the countries they're in and the countries that want us. We've gotten that budget up to $400 million,
right.
which is
the largest in the history of the Peace Corps.
but not with the largest numbers yet, right?
No, not yet. No, we're about half the size that we were during the Sergeant Shriver era when it was about 15, 16,000 volunteers. I think that, one of the things that we enjoy, and we enjoy, of course, your great support and the support of the other three members of Congress, we enjoy bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans see the value of the Peace Corps and how the Peace Corps can make a difference in the world, and so we're going to continue to look for ways to grow because we do have that kind of support from Congress.
Well, we're going through a budget debate right now as we speak, and yesterday the amendments were to cut $70 million out of the program this year. What kind of impacts? I mean, that's just far fewer volunteers. Your experience of being in USAID and being a career public servant in the foreign policy field, there is a comparison figure of what it costs to send a Peace Corps volunteer overseas versus a diplomat versus a soldier, and it's quite remarkable.
It is remarkable. I think that Peace Corps continues to be probably the best return on investment that America can make in having these goodwill ambassadors, as you called them earlier, to serve in the countries where we are. And the thing is, not a month goes by that I don't receive an inquiry from an ambassador from one of the host governments asking us to either grow or come into the country for the first time or expand a current program. So it's we have extraordinary opportunities. We certainly do. A long list of countries that want us to serve.
Well, you helped us with this sort of electronic. We're going to do something on this program never done before. We've asked people in my district who are Peace Corps volunteers, or either returned or is now serving, to ask questions that I can ask of you.
This is wonderful.
So let's do that.
All right.
The first question I have is from Darrell Lambert, who lives in Carmel Valley, serving in Costa Rica in Central America. And he asked, what opportunities did service in the Peace Corps open up, and how did it influence your life and career choices? Do you feel that you would have entered public service, I guess this is to both of us, if the Peace Corps did not exist?
Want me to answer first?
Yeah, you answer first.
I think that, first of all, the Peace Corps changed my life forever. There's just no doubt about it. Transformed my life because I didn't even know what a foreign service officer was as I graduated from college in Chicago. And so by going to the Peace Corps and learning about different cultures and learning to speak Spanish, having the ability to develop leadership skills and assume incredible responsibilities at an early age, it opened up vistas to me that I'd never even imagined. So because of the Peace Corps, I've been able to have a career as a foreign service officer, a business executive, an executive in a nonprofit organization, and now I have the great honor and privilege of being the director of the Peace Corps. So Peace Corps, as far as my life goes, meant everything. And as you mentioned earlier, I also met my wife in the Dominican Republic, and we've had a wonderful 40-year marriage, and this is all because of the Peace Corps.
Well, I had I didn't get married while I was in the Peace Corps, meeting my wife, but I had my honeymoon in Peace Corps. I recommend that's not a good thing to do. It's hard to go back when you're the hero and your spouse, your brand new bride is in a barrio without running water and out. This is honeymoon. Anyway, we've laughed about that, but it wasn't so funny at the moment. But it did change my life too, and here I am serving in Congress. I think Peace Corps, obviously my parents had a lot to do with it, my father being in politics, but this was the moment that I learned that I wanted to be in service. And
can I tell you a quick story?
Yes,
that
please.
ties into this? I traveled out to California for our training at San Diego State College. I arrived there with 100 people I'd never met before, all of us going overseas to serve in the Peace Corps. It was quite obvious to me, quite evident to me after the first 3 to 4 days that this was an exceptional group of people who had tremendous values, who were determined to serve, they were compassionate. It was just an extraordinary moment to be with people like this. And right away after the first week, I was so convinced that the Peace Corps was the right decision for me.
You know, they made us feel, I think, because of all the people you're talking about. When I was in training, it was almost like we were as important as astronauts. It was like we were going to go off into this frontier that had never been explored before. Here's another question from Matt Michaels from Santa Cruz, who's serving in the Ukraine. And he asked, what was the biggest challenge you faced as a Peace Corps volunteer? How did you overcome it? And and has what you learned from facing that challenge carried over to your current work?
Oh, it's easy for me to answer that question, Congressman, because the Spanish language was my biggest obstacle. I had never studied Spanish before. Peace Corps gave me a tremendously good base when I was in training, but I really had to fight hard and study hard to learn Spanish when I got to the Dominican Republic. And because of Peace Corps' training and the fact that I was totally immersed in the community and had to speak Spanish every day, within a year I became very fluent and was able to carry out my teaching duties. And as a matter of fact, at the end of my second year, I was asked to take a new job in a university in the Dominican Republic and teach an education course. So
That's right, you were a university professor there for your third year.
My third year. So I came a long way. And Spanish was my greatest challenge and I guess in many ways my greatest triumph.
Yeah, I think that the hardest part for me was just the acceptance. One, I nobody ever said it at the time, but I can realize that for the first time in my life I was a minority in another land. And and a crippled minority because I couldn't speak the language, so I had to learn that. And I think you face the fact that you're just challenging these sort of frontiers of poverty, the culture of poverty of which you haven't grown up. It's very hard at the moment. I mean, just it was exciting because it was a challenge, but it was also, oh my God, I'm really going to live in a house that doesn't have running water. And I'm going to not have the electricity I thought, and you're not going to have hot water. You know, you just don't have these things.
And then people are depending on you. Here you're a young person, you arrive there, and people in this community, whatever your project might have been, in my case teaching, they depend on you to do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
It's an awesome responsibility for a young person.
But what an acceptance by the host country of just appreciative that you're there, particularly living with them, where they've never seen people living in their conditions. Here's another one from a couple, Chelsea and Timothy Tibbs from Santa Cruz. They're serving in Guyana. And they ask, they say, when I was in high school, I worked as an intern in your Santa Cruz office. And during my experience there, I saw how Peace Corps shaped you into a person deeply committed to service. That was one of the reasons I was inspired to join the Peace Corps with my husband. Currently, we are enjoying our service in a large urban town in Guyana as a health and education volunteers. We wanted to ask you and the Director Williams how you think Peace Corps service has changed since the 1960s. How are the experiences of the volunteers different now than they were when you served, and how do you see the face of the organization changing in the future?
I think that let's talk about the things that are similar. As I've now traveled to 10 countries in the past year and a half since I've been director, and the thing that I see that we had when we were volunteers is the same passion, the ability to be so masterful in languages, the understanding of the cross-cultural differences between our culture and the culture of the host government and the host society, and the determination to make a difference. I see that as being very similar. I think in the years when we were in the Peace Corps, we of course battled poverty, illiteracy, famine in some cases, and now today we face similar problems in many different parts of the world. I think it's been exacerbated by climate change, by government instability and natural disasters. We see more and more natural disasters. We have to really deal with those. But I think there's a lot of similarities between our experience and what volunteers now face today. I think another thing that is different, obviously, is technology. When we went overseas, we were probably isolated from our families for at least a year or so. Very hard to call, if at all.
One conversation home and one in 2 years.
Same thing in my case, just once a year, sometime around my birthday. Nowadays, volunteers have cell phones, and the thing that's really interesting is that not only do the cell phones provide them an opportunity to connect with their family and friends, they use it in creative ways to enhance their projects, and that's really a big breakthrough.
So they can ask back for their country and family and friends to help them with
their projects.
That's terrific.
Yeah. A good example is that in Namibia, volunteers came up with a very creative way to use text messages to give young Namibians a chance to ask questions about public health questions about HIV/AIDS or other things in a safe environment. And it was so successful that the Ministry of Health in Namibia adopted it for a nationwide program.
And that was invented by the volunteers?
By the volunteers in text messaging, yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
That's terrific. I think probably Peace Corps is a lot harder to get into now than it was when I went in. Do you have to have a college education to get into Peace Corps?
It isn't exactly required, but I think it's very hard to get in without a college degree because about 85% of our Peace Corps volunteers are journalists, liberal arts graduates that come in, and so the competition is fierce.
And the host country wants professional people.
They do. They want people who have college degrees. I think the other thing, if you are mid-career or a retiree or like the lady in Morocco who's 86 years old, you bring considerable experience, and that makes a difference also. So I think the more experience you bring in, probably that would lessen the need for a college degree.
I hope people are listening to this, and there'll be people making their decisions. I think for a lot of retiree community with all that skill set they have are ideal for Peace Corps service.
We're hoping to tap the baby boomer generation, bring them into the Peace Corps, maybe for a second time. And I think the other thing, now that we're in our 50th anniversary, it's a wonderful time to use this as a platform to reintroduce the Peace Corps to America, and to recognize that despite the fact there's many different volunteer programs around the world, the United States Peace Corps continues to be really the blue ribbon, the outstanding example of volunteer service worldwide.
There are so many wonderful stories, and I hope we're able to tell those in this year with all the activities that are going on in Washington.
Yeah.
I think every single person who served in the Peace Corps has a remarkable story, a tear-jerking story, a story of laughter. I think the other skill one needs, I was thinking about it, is you got to be able to laugh at yourself.
You have to have a sense of humor.
You pull off some things that are really strange in that culture, just not knowing some cultural norms, and hopefully doesn't get you into trouble. But I remember sometimes thinking, oh my God, I just had to laugh at myself. I've got these facts on it. It says it's $50,000 to send one Peace Corps volunteer abroad for a year. That's not what they get paid, but that's the whole cost. If you divide the whole cost of Peace Corps, it costs $508,000 to send. It's $508,000 less than to send a foreign service officer abroad, and it's $644,000 less than to send one soldier to Afghanistan for a year. So it is a very cost-effective program. Where do we go from here? We got a couple of minutes left, and what do you think is the next tranche? If we hopefully we get you some money or hold the $400 million, and you're at 8,000 volunteers, and what are some of the things you see changing or expanding?
I think number one, we want to look for new countries to move into, places where volunteers can make a difference. I think we want to continue to invest.
Where's some the countries that a lot of people don't know is we're in China now.
We're in China. That's
with
right.
Peace Corps volunteers.
We have a large English language training program in China. That's right. With this past year, we went back into Indonesia, Sierra Leone, and of course your country of Colombia. And so those are all countries that we initially were in during the Shriver-Kennedy era.
Do we still have volunteers in Russia?
No, we don't. No,
we had it for a short period?
We did for a short period of time. But our largest program in the world, interestingly enough, and very different from when you and I served, is the Ukraine. And a lot of that's teaching English as a second language. It's a really large program.
And we still have volunteers in Nepal?
No, we do not.
Wow.
That was another classic Peace Corps program.
that
we hope
worked
to get
itself
back in
out,
there.
or was it one of
Because of political turmoil.
political turmoil?
Yeah, we hope to go back in.
Well, I'm going to be meeting next week. I'm going on a congressional delegation to Indonesia, and we're going to be meeting with volunteers in Indonesia.
They're
So
looking forward to seeing you out there.
Well,
that's going to be quite a thrill for them to see a returned Peace Corps volunteer in their own site.
Well, the members of Congress that are going, this is one of the highlights of the trip, is to be able to meet these volunteers and talk to them, because you really get a sense of country that you
really
don't
do.
get from other kinds of briefings.
Peace Corps volunteers have a very special perspective on the country where they live and work, because they're at the grassroots level making a difference. I've seen in my travels in Peace Corps young women teaching basic hygiene to young kids on the edge of the Sahara Desert. I've seen a young man planting trees to fight environmental degradation on the fertile fields of Ghana. It's amazing what you can see and how dedicated people are, and they're making a difference. I've seen volunteers working to combat malaria by distributing bed nets in western Senegal. So it's quite extraordinary what these volunteers are doing, and the passion that they bring to what they do, and also the other thing, the love that the people in those communities extend to them, and the cloak that they wrap around them.
Well, I have to tell this story. You've heard it, but my former colleague, because he didn't win re-election, but he was the colleague from Cincinnati, Congressman House, and he served at Senegal.
Senegal, right.
And he told us a story that during his campaign, he heard that there was a new Senegalese restaurant in Cincinnati, and he went to visit it.
Yeah.
He walked in and knew that the gal there, who was the maitre d', was Senegalese, so he started talking to her in Wolof.
Right.
Their language.
Yeah.
She was so struck to see this guy speaking Wolof, and he said they went through these introductions, and he realized as they go through the introductions, because you go into your family backgrounds and ties and who you are, and when she'd finished, he said, "Oh my God, you're my sister." And he said, "Do you remember your father, uncle had adopted me? He was the chief of the tribe, and that I was when you were the little girl when this white guy came into your house." And she said, "Was that you?" I was just a little girl. He says, "Yeah, that's me." And it was some 7 or 8 years after he left Senegal.
What a wonderful Peace Corps story.
Yeah, it really is.
Shows the difference you make in people's lives. Yeah.
And then she said, "Do you want to talk to my dad?" And he pulled out a cell phone, and he was as shocked as we all would be, because we didn't have any of those kinds of instruments there. The world is changing. Peace Corps is making it a heck of a lot better. It's its 50th anniversary.
Wonderful. Yeah.
This is really a great opportunity. Thank you for being on my program.
It's my pleasure. And can I just say one last thing about, as I travel the world, I've gone to Ghana recently, which was the first country we were in. And I spoke to leaders in government and business and working with non-governmental organizations at grassroots level. Every one of those men and women that I spoke to had a positive experience with Peace Corps when they were young. The leaders of Ghana really recognize the importance that Peace Corps has made in that country. 50 years of uninterrupted service in one country. That's the difference Peace Corps has made.
I hope that this year on its 50th anniversary that the whole nation will celebrate one of the greatest ideas we've ever had, an idea that will last for a long, long time, as long as there's a spirit of Americans to serve.
I think that's right. And
thank you for being our director.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching.
For more information, contact one of Congressman Farr's district offices. You can also reach Congressman Farr in Washington or visit his website.